Hi everyone. Good evening. This is Madeline Feierstein and Evan Portman. Joined with us, Chris Mowery from Vlogging Through History. This is the third installment in our In Conversation Live on ECW. We're very excited to have you guys today. We're going to talk about all things Civil War. If you have a question for our speaker, please put them in the chat. We'll take questions at the end. We'll do a little Q&A section towards the end of our stream. So Chris, thank you so much for joining us today. Do you want to give our viewers a little introduction to yourself and to your awesome channel?
So, my name's Chris Mowery. I'm from Northeast Ohio, something I talk about a lot. My main channel is called Vlogging Through History. I also have a couple of side channels and some podcasts focused on the American Civil War called Stories of the Civil War, and then World War I called Stories of the Great War. And I've been doing this for about 5.5 years now, and it's become a full-time job for me, and I get to do fun things like be a part of the Gettysburg Film Festival and link up with guys like Gary and Chris from the American Battlefield Trust. And I know, of course, Chris is a part of your organization as well, and it's just caused me to get to meet a whole lot of amazing people like you guys that are as passionate as I am about the American Civil War. So great to be here.
Excellent.
That's awesome.
And we're going to, excuse me, we have a QR code, by the way, I forgot to mention at the beginning. There'll be a QR code on the screen. So if you guys want to scan that, there it is. Go ahead and scan that and go to our website. Thank you.
Sweet. Yeah, definitely check that out. So Chris, one of the things I think, an emerging Civil War we like to talk about is kind of our Civil War origin story. So is there a point, kind of where you really just got into the Civil War, even just, kind of history in general?
Yeah, so it was the 1980s. I'm aging myself, dating myself a little bit there, but it was a couple of things that came out in the 80s. One was The Blue and the Gray, the miniseries that came out. You had North and South, with Patrick Swayze, and Gore Vidal's Lincoln with Sam Waterston, who I got to meet last year, which was amazing. And then the primary thing that really got me into the Civil War was Ken Burns' Civil War. And then, of course, I got to meet Ken in the last couple of years in Gettysburg. And so I've always had this part of me that when I get interested in something, I get obsessed with it. And the Civil War has been one of those obsessions that I've just never let go of. It just has been something that I've gotten more and more into. And my family would take me to the Gettysburg battlefield, and they took me to Fredericksburg and to Manassas, and they really fed that for me. And all my gifts at Christmas were Civil War books, and I would go out in the backyard and pretend to be a soldier and use my little sister as my messenger back to my grandpa with asking for orders and stuff like that. And then I got into high school and really got into family history and started researching and found out that I had 13 direct ancestors who fought in the Civil War, which is a ridiculously high number. I've never found anybody that I've researched that's had that many. And so that just caused me to start looking into them. And so, I guess those 80s miniseries were my gateway drug.
Nice. And so when you made your channel, what was the inspiration behind Vlogging Through History?
So it's kind of a weird story. It actually started with, for the last 10 years, I've been a speaker for an organization called Rachel's Challenge, which was founded by the family of one of the Columbine victims. And we talk about kindness and compassion and just encouraging students to treat each other better. And so I would travel all over the country full time for about 3 months in the fall, going to schools. And occasionally I'd have a day off and I'd, try to get to historic sites, and I'd just make little videos on my phone about it. But I came home, and for the other 9 months of the year, I started a YouTube channel playing strategy games, and I would just talk about the history behind the game. So if I was playing the Battle of Gettysburg in a game, I would talk about the real history. Here's what really happened. And so those two things morphed into, I thought, well, I'm making these little vlogs on my phone anyway. Why don't I just start a channel where I just put those videos called Vlogging Through History? And right about the time I started the channel, COVID happened. And when your job is speaking to large groups of people in confined spaces, you don't work during COVID. And so I was sitting at home with nothing to do. Somebody said, well, why don't you do some reaction videos, watch history videos and just comment on them, talk about what they get right, give more information about it. And that was what Vlogging Through History started to become because of necessity. But since then, I've gotten back to doing the vlogs. I do a lot of travel. I go to a lot of battlefields. I'm leading some battlefield tours now. So it's kind of a little bit of everything.
Mhm.
That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah. So if I'm not mistaken, I think religion is also kind of part of your
Yeah.
background.
So
correct?
so I majored in history in college, but then I ended up going into ministry, and I was a youth pastor for 14 years. And I'm still, I still work in a church on the weekends. So that's always been a part of, but history was always kind of my first love, and that was what I went to school for. And so this became the outlet for me to explore that side that I wasn't otherwise getting to. And now I get to be on the History Channel, and I get to do all these cool things. And it's stuff that I wanted to do when I was 18, but it just took till my mid 40s before I actually got to do it.
Yeah. So tell us about, we're going to talk about some of your Civil War favorites. I know it's a big
Okay.
topic because this could go on for hours, but you can feel free to choose if you want to specify like a place you like, a person you're very fond of, an event you like to study, because you do go on those battlefield tours and you do
Mhm.
travel. So I just want to let you have a chance to tell our viewers some of your top 5 or just general Civil War favorites for us.
Okay, so favorite battlefields, I probably have 2, and I love every one of them. They all have their unique things, but if you're gonna nail me down and say pick a favorite, it's got to be the Vicksburg battlefield. Actually, that whole campaign. First of all, really unique. If you've ever been there, fascinating battlefield. Plus, I have deep family connections through the 20th Ohio. I have an ancestor who was there, and that's who I'm writing about right now. Is that unit, and so that's definitely one. I'd say another one for me would be Shiloh for a lot of the same reasons.
Mhm.
It's cool because it hasn't changed much. It's not touristy. You can go there and kind of be alone for the most part. You can still see all the spots, and you can still see Confederate burial trenches, and that's hardly anywhere you see that on a battlefield. So I love that. Favorite people in the Civil War? Well, Grant. I'm Grant. Ulysses S. Grant is probably my all-time favorite American of all time. I just think he has an amazing story. I'm also very, very biased toward anybody who's from Ohio. So Grant, Sherman, Stanton, all those guys. But I love his story. I love his character, the person that he is, how he basically sucked at everything at life except for being a husband and a father and being a general. And that was really all he needed to be good at. But so he's a real favorite of mine. On the Confederate side, I guess I'm a little partial to Patrick Cleburne. He's got a fascinating story for me too, coming from Ireland, being one of the few guys who stood up and said, "Hey, maybe we should consider freeing these enslaved people," and got basically blacklisted because of it, and then dies in this just debacle of a battle at Franklin, which is also a really cool battlefield, really neat place to visit. What else? Favorite story?
Sure.
Let me think of an interesting story that I like from.
I mean,
the
you were
Civil
telling
War.
us earlier about what you get to look out at your window.
Oh
every day.
yeah. So
Yeah.
so the place I live, and I'm not giving away anything people don't already know. I live in a town called Poland, Ohio, which is outside of Youngstown, about halfway between Cleveland and Pittsburgh. And one of the people who grew up in Poland was William McKinley, the future president. And he enlisted at the age of 18 in Company E of the 23rd Ohio, which was known as the Poland Guards. And I can look out my window and see the steps that he stood on when he enlisted. Actually, a friend of mine, Matt Beat, who has a channel, Mr. Beat, did a video on McKinley, and I went down and shot some video of that site for him for his video. So yeah, that's really cool. And just through the woods on the other side of the street here is a big monument to William McKinley, and a big circle that has a bunch of the guys from Company E buried in it. And they got to serve with not one but 2 presidents because their lieutenant colonel was Rutherford B. Hayes. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, I guess maybe that's one of my favorite stories.
Yeah. Are there any others?
Oh gosh, I could probably always think of more.
Yeah.
But I'm really drawn to the stories that I like, the stories that people don't know about, because we can tell the stories of battles and generals, and those are great stories, and we're fascinated by them. but I'm really interested in the little things and the stories of individuals, and especially in my own family. My fourth great grandfather was in the 4th Pennsylvania Cavalry, and I have a story that he had in his pension file about during the 7 Days Battle when he was serving as a courier for General McCall. And he was sent by General McCall with a message to take to General Reynolds during this one particular battle. And he talks about how he rode hard and never found General Reynolds. And then when he came back, he couldn't find General McCall, and he got really sick and almost had to leave the service. And then when you compare that to the battlefield records, you find out that both General McCall and General Reynolds were captured during that battle. So the two guys he was a go-between in that both were captured, and there he was trying to find them. So it's really cool just to find my little family connection to a story like that.
Yes. Cool.
That's very cool. Has there ever been like a moment you're on a battlefield or kind of at a historic site, like where you're just kind of moved or kind of captivated by kind of the grandiosity of it? Like, have you ever kind of just had a wow or a whoa?
Yeah. One that sticks out to me right away. There are moments when, you read about a battle, you study it, and then you go to the place, and often you experience it differently when you're there, or you understand it better. For me, the first time I went to Cold Harbor, and there's not a lot of the Cold Harbor battlefield that's preserved, but that spot where that disastrous attack at the beginning of June of 1864, going there and kind of seeing what's left of the entrenchments, there was just a feeling that came over me that I've never really experienced before. Just there was that dread, that heaviness of how awful that moment was for those Union soldiers who went over the top, and almost reminiscent of what was going to come 50 years later in World War I, where these guys go over the top and they just die by the thousands in a small space. So I really felt that there. There was another one on the Gettysburg battlefield. I mentioned earlier the 4th Pennsylvania Cavalry, my ancestor who was there. And the 4th PA Cavalry Monument is on Cemetery Ridge, real close to where the Father Corby Monument is, just south of the Pennsylvania Monument. And that's where they were stationed on July 2nd because they were there protecting artillery positions. From that monument, you can look out and see the peach orchard and see the Sherfy farm. And you can see the monument to the 57th Pennsylvania. Well, my ancestor in the 4th PA Cav, his son was in the 57th Pennsylvania. And that unit suffered like 50% casualties in that battle. They were at the apex of Dan Sickles' line when he went out ahead of the Union line and got smashed. And all I could think was, here's this 45-year-old man who, about my age, standing there watching his son's unit get destroyed in the peach orchard, wondering if his son's alive. And it became very personal. And at that moment, it wasn't about the battle. It wasn't about 50,000 casualties. It was about a father and son. And that's what these stories are over and over and over and over again. Yeah.
Are there any topics that you want to learn more about that you're not as well versed in, or that you just haven't had the time to study as much as you want?
Yeah. When it comes to the Civil War, the Trans-Mississippi Theater, I just know so little about that. And honestly, some of the Shenandoah Valley battles, I'd like to get to know better. I'm just starting to get into some of that, but I'll confess that growing up, like a lot of people, it was the Eastern Theater. That was all that mattered. And then I found out about my family connections to the Western Theater, and now that's all I care about. But there's a lot more to the war. And I think that's something a lot of people don't realize, is that most of the soldiers who fought in the Civil War didn't fight in any of those big battles. They were on guard duty in Eastern Tennessee, or they were hunting down rebels, in Western Kentucky. I mean, most of my ancestors, I mentioned earlier, the 13 ancestors, 2 of them were in the big battles, one in the Western Theater and one in the Eastern Theater. The other 11 were mostly in Kentucky units that never fought in any big battles. And that's really the story for most people in the Civil War, I think.
Oh yeah, it's like the support staff that need to help the whole machine run. You got people who are at desks, you got people who are hospital stewards, people that are getting people off the battlefield. communications. That is all equally important, and we don't shed a lot of light on
And that's something Grant's autobiography, he talks about that. He said, when you look at a figure and you see, the Army of the Potomac had 90,000 men at this battle. No, they really didn't have 90,000 men fighting in that battle, because they had people guarding supply lines, and they had people doing communication, and they had people in the hospitals, like you said. And especially for the Union later in the war, as they're going deeper and deeper into Confederate territory, they're spreading out, having to protect all of these garrisons and all of these supply depots and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So I'm a big fan of religious history and kind of, I don't know, the intersection there. So I'm curious, kind of your background, in ministry, does that factor into, kind of your perspective on the Civil War, or kind of your perspective?
Absolutely. I think it causes me to be drawn to some of those stories. I'm fascinated, for example, like, the story of Father Corby giving absolution to his Catholic Irish Brigade before they go into the wheat field at Gettysburg. And, understanding how much, religion was really at the heart of this for a lot of these guys. And, Lincoln very famously talked about how both sides prayed to the same God, both invoked his aid against the other, but the prayers of both could not be answered. One must be and both may be completely wrong when they think that God's on their side. And both sides thought that God was on their side and that they had his justice, behind it. And, so I think, like most of history, religion is one of the lenses through which we can view things. There's so many, I talk about viewing history through different lenses. You can view the Civil War through the lens of economics and all the money factors. You can view the Civil War through logistics and how important being able to move things was. The Battle of Fredericksburg, for example, in my mind, was lost before any shots were fired, because they screwed up with logistics and didn't get the pontoon boats there on time and all those sorts of things. So that's a lens through which we can view history, and religion is another one of those lenses through which we can understand the motivations of the men. We can understand their devotion to their cause. We can understand their willingness to die. A lot of that has to do with their faith.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So one of the great things you've announced on your channel recently is your upcoming book. And I want to give you a chance to plug that and tell us what is it about? What has inspired you to write it?
So going back again to my family, my fifth great-grandfather was born in 1809. So he was 52 years old when the Civil War broke out. And he enlisted as a private in Company H of the 20th Ohio. Lied about his age, said he was 44 on his enlistment record. His youngest son was 15 and enlisted as the drummer in the company. And so I wonder if he went just to keep an eye on his son. And he was the one who was in all those battles. He was at Fort Donelson. He was at Shiloh. He was at Vicksburg. He was at Atlanta. And as I started going to these battlefields, and I went, to Vicksburg, and you go to Vicksburg, and I don't know if you guys have ever been there, but you have the main road in the center of Vicksburg, right near where the surrender happened. You have the big Illinois monument right there, and they have this spot called the 3rd Louisiana Redan, where one of the main attacks happened in May of 1863. And you march down that road, and there's these markers saying, this is how far this unit got. This is how far this unit got. And the furthest marker, the closest one to the Confederate lines, is this is how far the 20th Ohio got that day. And all I could think of was this by this time, 54-year-old man marching, charging across this open battlefield at the Confederates. And so I wanted to know more. And so I started thinking about this idea of writing a book on the 20th Ohio. And as I started doing research, I was so overwhelmed by the amount of information that was available that I cut it down and said, no, I'm just going to write the book about just the one company, Company H. And my inspiration for it is Band of Brothers. If you've seen Band of Brothers, it's the whole story of World War II, but it's told about one company, Company E of, the 506 Parachute Infantry. So that was my inspiration for it. And so there were 132 officers and men who at some point during the war from the fall of 61 to the summer of 65 served in Company H. And I did background research, biographical research into all 132 of them. I got their pension files. I got their military records. I went to their graves because Company H was recruited right here in what we call the Mahoning Valley. It was the only company in that regiment that was from here. The rest of the regiment was all from central and western Ohio. So they were like these orphans among this regiment that wasn't from here. And so I started doing the research, and I started finding all these amazing stories about these guys who nobody's ever heard of, but their stories have become precious to me. And, you know, the first casualty in the company was their very first time under fire was when they had to do this long march at midnight in the sleet at Fort Donelson when they arrived on the battlefield at Fort Donelson. And they arrived just as the Confederates are attempting their breakout. And so they're behind the lines and shells are going off everywhere, and they're not given any orders to advance or retreat. They're just standing there under fire. And the first casualty in the company was a guy who was loading his gun and shot off 2 of his own fingers. And, you know, so that telling that story, telling the story of the 15-year-old Benjamin Knox, who was killed at the Battle of Atlanta, who had no business even being in the Army at that age, but was killed at the Battle of Atlanta, or, you know, the 6 guys that were killed at Raymond, a battle nobody's ever heard of, but the 20th Ohio was the very first regiment in Logan's division at the head of the column when they were marching toward Jackson, and they got ambushed at Raymond. And so for the 20th Ohio, Raymond and Atlanta were the 2 deadliest days of the war for them. And, you know, those are just incredible stories. And a bunch of these guys ended up at Andersonville. And so I get to tell the story of Andersonville through the lens of these soldiers from this company. And a couple of them died on the Sultana. And so that they're connected to that part of the story. So there were all these things. And the company commander, this guy named Edward Downs, wrote letters home to the local newspaper like every month or so. And I've got every one of these letters, and, you know, he gives this amazing detail about exactly what their company was doing at all of these battles. And I've got letters downstairs written by soldiers that were there. And I got in contact with a guy who has a picture of 4 of the enlisted men from the company. It's the only picture that I've ever seen of men in the company during the war. And now that's going to be the cover of the book. So it's an incredible story, and I'm hoping to have it done in the next couple of months. It's going to probably be 400 or 500 pages, and it's all just about these 132 guys in this one company, going from their guard duty outside of Cincinnati at the beginning of the war, all the way to being in the march, the celebration, what do you call it, in Washington in July,
the Grand
Review. So, you know, then, you know, in between, you know, there's 1,000 little stories. And there's even this one guy, his name was Lorraine Ruggles, who a couple of the guys from the company were on their way back home to Northeast Ohio to do a recruitment drive. And they run into this guy at the train station. He's like, "Yeah, you guys look like some good soldiers. If you can promise me you'll get me an Enfield rifle, I'll sign up with you right now." So he joins. They find him an Enfield rifle on the battlefield at Shiloh because the Confederates, all these dead Confederates, left these Enfields. And so the 20th Ohio had been armed with 1817 flintlock, modified flintlock Harper's Ferry muskets at the beginning of the war because the state of Ohio was short on guns. And so at Shiloh, they threw all of those down and just grabbed a bunch of Confederate Enfields and armed the whole regiment that way. But then Ruggles, because he had grown up in the South, even though he was born in Ohio, he gets enlisted first by Sherman and McPherson, and then later by Grant as a spy. And he actually dresses as a Confederate, goes behind the lines. And then in 1865, Ruggles and Downs, the company commander, wrote a book called 4 Years a Scout and Spy. So I've got this whole book written the year the war ended by a guy in the company that tells their whole story. And it's amazing. So stuff I never knew existed until I started doing the research. I saw somebody ask on the thing there, when's the book coming out? The goal is March of this year, because I'm leading a Shiloh battlefield tour at the end of March. and I have promised everybody there a signed copy of the book. So that's the goal right now, is to have it ready for them so I don't have to mail it to them afterwards. So
Yeah. The external accountability.
yeah, exactly. I need that.
For sure. So what's one of the challenges, I guess, that you've kind of encountered with writing this book that maybe you didn't anticipate? Or
the challenge for me is knowing when to quit researching and start writing. Because I always think to myself, there's one more thing I can find. There's one more detail. There's one more story. And so I spent 2.5 years researching the book, probably spent 20 hours a week researching the book, went to Washington, D.C. to the National Archives, gone around to cemeteries, all this stuff. And there's always one more thing I think I'll find. And I've talked to other authors about their process, and a lot of them said, you just have to start writing, and then you can keep researching while you're writing. And so I've done a little bit of all of that. And believe it or not, one of the things I've learned is that I wasn't as good a writer as I thought I was. So I've been learning how better, I'm a genealogist. I've written a lot of genealogy books, family history books, but they tend to be very dry. And I'm trying to make this interesting and trying to help people to imagine these events in their mind. And so I'm having to train myself to not just be the historian giving facts, but to try to actually create a picture for people's minds and to describe things in a way that makes it come alive. So that's been a challenge for me. And I think I'm getting better at it, but maybe by the second or third book, I'll be much better at it.
I mean, I struggled with that coming from academia, the way you would write for like professors, professional spaces. And I'm in the process of transforming my master's thesis into a manuscript, which is due very soon. You reminded me. And so I had to take out a lot of the dry so-and-so said back in 18, and actually make it a conversation, right? Storytelling, put yourself in there. Yep. You lead a lot of battlefield tours, and I bet you have a great reputation for putting people in people's shoes when you do these tours. What were some maybe upcoming, or even if you want to talk about past battlefield tours, ones that really stuck out to you, ones you've really enjoyed, or ones you're really looking forward to?
So the first one I ever did was I went to Shiloh, and this wasn't even really intended to be a tour. But what happened was I was going to be there for a couple of days making videos for the channel, just doing like a video battlefield tour of Shiloh. And a couple of weeks before, I just announced on the channel, I said, hey, if anybody wants to come and just tour the battlefield with me, meet me at noon on Friday at the visitor center. I didn't ask people to register or anything. I just said, hey, just show up here. And like 25 people showed up. Some of them had driven like 10 or 12 hours just to come and spend 3 or 4 hours with me on the battlefield. And I thought, this is awesome. There are a bunch of people. I know Gary Edelman calls them losers when you get to the level that we're at with this stuff. You kind of go from nerd to loser, and loser is a compliment. It's like the ultimate, right? And I realized how many losers out there, just like me, are passionate about this stuff. And so that, along with doing like overseas tours and things like going to Europe and things like that, going to Jordan next week for a group tour that I'm hosting, just helped me realize that there's a real hunger, not only for people to have someone that can take them around the battlefield and share these stories and really know and share their knowledge, but also the community that comes with that, to be with a group of 20 people who love this stuff as much as we do, so that we can share it with them. And so when I, go to one of the fields there, stand at Pittsburgh Landing and talk about the chaos and talk about my favorite story from Shiloh, which is when Sherman and Grant are standing under a tree where the cemetery is today. And Sherman's like, well, Grant, we've had the devil's own day, haven't we? And Grant just says, yeah, lick them tomorrow, though. And I love that so much. And I know that when we stand in that spot where Grant's headquarters was there on Pittsburgh Landing, and I share that story, that everybody else will be as nerded out by that as I am. Yep. So I love that kind of stuff. I love just being able to, and then even after the battlefield, just going and eating at a restaurant and continuing the conversation. And I did a 2-day Vicksburg tour, and the highlight for that, for me, anybody who's been to Vicksburg, if you've been to, Port Gibson, is it Port Gibson? No, not Port Gibson. What's the first battle there? Give me a second now. Anyway, so when Grant crosses the Mississippi River, Port Gibson. If you ever go to the Port Gibson battlefield, it makes the wilderness in Virginia look like New York City. I mean, Port Gibson it's dirt roads. It's like cliffs that go up 10 feet on either side. So you're driving like through a tunnel in the woods. There's no civilization for miles in any direction. And there had just been rain. And so here I am leading this caravan of cars back to the middle of Port Gibson battlefield. And there are spots where you're lining up your tires because for 6 inches on either side of your tire, it's a drop off of 2 feet, and your car's going to get stuck if you don't perfectly line it up. And so driving back there, and then we go to this spot, I think it's the Schaefer farm. It was a hospital, and there's a well there, and we opened up the lid for the well, and you could hear rattlesnakes down there.
Oh no.
So those are the things that everybody remembers about that tour is
the
precarious nature of the drive. But now they have a picture in their minds of what that battlefield was like for the men who fought there. That's how crazy rural it was. And so those are the things that I take with me from those tours that I love so much.
Oh, that's amazing. So with you have your book coming up, and you did mention to us you had a potential second book topic. And I know this is, of course, preliminary. It's not in the works. It's, it could change, but it's something you're also passionate about with the Civil War. And I want to give you a chance to also talk to us about that.
Okay. So I've actually, now that I've got a taste for it, and now that I'm writing the book on the Trumbull County Boys, which is going to be the title, by the way, because Captain Downs, the guy that I said wrote all the letters back home, even though they weren't all from Trumbull County, a lot of them were from Mahoning County, which is where I live. He referred to them in the letters as the Trumbull County Boys. And so that's what the title of the book. I've got two other ideas, one of which is Civil War and one's actually World War I. And they're both about local units here. As I mentioned earlier, William McKinley was in Company E of the 23rd Ohio. They were known as the Poland Guards. I live in Poland. So I'm doing a little preliminary research into them. I've also thought about writing a book about a company known as the Hiram Boys, which Hiram's about 40 minutes away from me. I was recruited by James Garfield. He was a professor. He was actually what would now be the president of Hiram College. And he was a professor there. And he was an Ohio state legislator. And he came home to Hiram to recruit a company for the 41st Ohio. And he recruited a bunch of his former students, and they called them the Hiram Boys. So I might write about them, but I'm also looking into a machine gun company from World War I that was called the Youngstown Iron Guards from Youngstown, Ohio. So yes, as Michael said, this writing history books is rather addictive. I just have to find the time to do it, but I do. I absolutely love it. I love researching. I love finding details and little nuggets about things that I get to share with the world, and hopefully there'll be an audience for it.
Of course. I definitely think there will be.
For sure. Yeah, somebody, one of my undergrad professors said, after the first time you're doing research, it's like you're Tom Hanks in Da Vinci Code, right? You're like, at least that's how you feel. It is addicting for sure.
So somebody just said they're in the Mahoning Valley Civil War Roundtable. I have never been to one. Like, I live in the Mahoning Valley. I've been to the Cleveland Civil War Roundtable a bunch of times, but I guess I'm gonna have to get connected with them.
Right?
Oh yeah, for sure. So kind of sticking with the theme of favorites, what's one of your favorite places to grab a meal and perhaps a libation after a battlefield trek?
Oh, okay. So Gettysburg is the place I spend a ton of time. My friend Eric Dorr, who owns the Gettysburg Museum of History, introduced me to the Hoof, Fin, and Fowl, which is a restaurant at Gettysburg. So I like that. But honestly, my son Eli, who's 13, who's in the next room right now, who goes with me to Gettysburg all the time, he would probably tell you the same thing I would, which is my favorite place to go at Gettysburg has to be Mr. G's ice cream.
Yep.
And there's always a long line there. It's really good. There's a really good ice cream place in Sharpsburg, Maryland, too, on the Antietam battlefield. There's not much else there other than the ice cream place, but they have really good ice cream there, too. So those are a couple of places. I like just going and hanging out anywhere in downtown Gettysburg, going to the little restaurants there. O'Rourke's is a kind of a bustling little Irish pub that you can go to. I like that one a lot. You go to Shiloh, and I forget the name of it, but there's only one restaurant anywhere near the battlefield, and it's like a seafood place that's right next to the battlefield. Otherwise, you got to drive 20 minutes to get to anything. So, but it's pretty good food too.
Yeah, awesome. Something that the social media team here at ECW likes talking about a lot is where we live and how much Civil War stuff there is around us. A lot of us live in the DC area. We got a lot of people in Pennsylvania too. And we were talking, Tyler and I from Northern Virginia, about how you could just walk 2 feet and you hit something, some Civil War history. And you love your town, you love your state. But I want to ask you a tricky question. If you could live anywhere else that's Civil War related, where would it be? And I know you're probably going to default to Gettysburg, but I'm going to challenge you to think maybe grander here.
Fredericksburg. I think Chris White lives down in that area somewhere, doesn't he? I know he's from Pittsburgh, but
Mikowski, I think.
Chris Mikowski.
Oh, Chris Mikowski's from, okay.
Yeah.
So just because of how close it is to everything in the Eastern, I mean, you're right there. First of all, you're practically on top of Fredericksburg, Wilderness, Chancellorsville, and Spotsylvania battlefields. You're not far from Manassas. You're not far from the Shenandoah Valley. You're really not that far from Gettysburg and Antietam. You're not far from Richmond and Petersburg. If I could live somewhere Civil War related, it would be there. But don't discount where I do live. My church that I pastor still is in Salineville, Ohio. Now, do you know the significance of Salineville, Ohio?
Do not.
Northernmost battle of the American Civil War. Was fought in Salineville, Ohio. It was the last day of Morgan's raid. And so where our church is, that morning, so John Hunt Morgan camped the night before in Bergholz, which is where the church camp I grew up attending is in Bergholz. He rode north into Salineville. Throughout the night, they had been by train bringing in militia from Pennsylvania, and this whole brigade of Union militia was lined up right outside where my church is, right on the main road our church is on. And when Morgan came up over the hill and saw the militia, he turned and ran, and they pursued him, and they fought a battle about about half a mile outside of Salineville. He rode north toward Lisbon and surrendered later that day. And so like a half a mile from my church is where the northernmost battle of the Civil War was fought.
You got a lot of things around you, man.
For sure. So Salineville, Ohio, that you said that's part of Morgan's raid, right? So go ahead.
It's in Columbiana County. It's not far from the Ohio River, West Virginia. The place he surrenders called West Point, Ohio. It's near Lisbon. But the battle that morning was fought in Salineville. It was the last battle. And talk about family connections. Most of my family is from Eastern Kentucky, and my grandpa's great uncle was one of Morgan's raiders in the Confederate Army. And I found his POW record, and he was initially, I think, sent to Camp Chase, Ohio. But when it said where he was captured, it said he was captured in Salineville, Ohio. And just seeing that was really cool, being that that's where my church is. And my grandpa's great uncle from Kentucky was captured there. Just really cool stuff.
Yeah.
Well,
so to remind our guests that,
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Evan. That's no issue.
Okay.
So I want to remind our guests that we do have our chat. We're going to do some Q&A in a minute here. So please field your questions to Chris in the chat, and then we'll have Tyler, who's behind the scenes of our social media team here, put our questions on the screen for Chris. I just want to give a little reminder to everyone. If you do have a question for Chris, feel free to ask directly. Thank you. Go ahead, Evan.
Sweet. No, yeah. So it seems like you have ancestors that were on both sides of the Civil War. Is that correct?
9 Union, 4 Confederate. Yeah.
Wow. So what is that like? What is that like? Because I don't think that's super common in kind of the
no, I mean, but when your family's from Kentucky, it is. In fact, one of my grandpa's great uncles fought for both sides.
Wow.
Whoa.
There were 3 brothers in the Confederate Army, 2 brothers in the Union Army, and 1 brother who fought for both. And that's a fascinating story too. He was in, what happened was there was this unit, it was 13th Kentucky Cavalry. Caudle's Ben Caudle was the commander, and Ben Caudle is actually one of my ancestors himself. But they rode into Olive Hill, Kentucky, in northeast Kentucky, and basically conscripted all the military age men into their unit, whether they wanted to be or not. And about 10 days after he was conscripted, he deserted and enlisted in the Union Army, like the next day. He was captured later on during a skirmish with the unit he had deserted from. They shipped him off to Richmond to stand trial for desertion, and the authorities in Richmond sent him to Andersonville, and he died in Andersonville. So his name was Henderson Gearhart, and he has an unknown grave there. So, but yeah, it's unusual. And you know, it's obviously it's delicate. I'm very pro-union in my sentiments, of course, and you know, I'm fascinated by their story. None of my four, you know, Confederate ancestors were slave owners. They didn't come from families who were slave owners. And that's not unusual. I know that. And they had everybody, you know, individual soldiers had 1,000 different reasons why they fought that maybe had nothing to do with why their government was fighting. So I try to keep that perspective to understand that each one of these guys had their own reasons for doing what they did, or maybe just didn't have a choice. So I can research them, I can be interested in them, and I can honor them as individuals without having to honor the cause that they were fighting for.
Yeah, no, I completely understand that. We have some amazing questions popping up in the chat, and we have questions that started back right when we went live. So I want to give Chris a chance to answer as many as we can. So Tyler, go ahead and select our first question for the hour here, and then we'll go ahead and see what Chris thinks. Lightning round.
Okay.
Tyler?
All
right. If you could choose two
most underrated Civil War generals.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, I don't know how underrated he is. I guess I would say one that I think those of us who are really passionate about the Civil War know, but maybe people outside of that don't. John Gibbon. I love John Gibbon. He's a Southerner, right? His brothers he was from North Carolina. All his brothers fought for the Confederacy. He actually faced off against his brothers at Fredericksburg at the slaughter pen field. I think he's one of those. He commanded the Iron Brigade in their early days. Ends up a fantastic, I think, division commander, and kind of one of the people that flies under the radar a little bit. Honestly, George Meade too. Meade was good at every level that he commanded troops. And he gets overshadowed so much by Grant that, you know, a lot of people don't even know that he still commanded the Army of the Potomac to the end of the war. I love George Meade. He's great. On the Confederate side, I think more of overrated than I do underrated, but and I think he's getting more love. I mentioned him earlier, Patrick Cleburne. I think more lately, it seems like people are starting to talk more about Cleburne. Should have been in command of the Confederate Army late in the war. Didn't even get a corps command because of being blacklisted, but, you know, only commanded a division when he should have been commanding much higher levels. But another guy who I just think always, like, you can't really point to really any bad, never really had a bad day on the battlefield, Patrick Cleburne, except for the day that he was killed. So yeah, I guess for me, Gibbon and Cleburne would be the two I would think of. Awesome.
All right. We got our next question coming up.
General question, but why do you all think McClellan was so passive in almost every potential encounter? It's a good question.
Yeah, and I'm well known as somebody who has a great deal of disdain for George McClellan. I think what made him so popular with his men was also what made him so unwilling to sacrifice any of them on the battlefield. I think there's a quote in the movie Gettysburg where they show Lee talking to Longstreet, and he talks about being a good general and being a good commander, and how you have to love the army, but you also have to be willing to order to the death of the thing that you love. I think McClellan loved his men and they loved him, but he wasn't willing to order the death of the thing that he loved. And the sad part is that in his unwillingness to fully commit his army, he ended up causing the death of a whole lot more of them than he would have if he would have just taken Richmond in 1862, like he absolutely could have. I think he was just didn't want to see those men die. I think that it really was that simple. And so I think that's what caused him to believe those ridiculous figures that he was being fed about how many men the Confederates had, thinking he was constantly outnumbered when he had 30, 40, 50,000 more men than they did. I think he just wanted to believe that because it gave him an excuse not to send his army into battle.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. All right. What is your view of Lew Wallace at Shiloh?
I just wrote this chapter in the book.
Yeah.
It's a big part of the chapter on Shiloh. So the 20th Ohio was in Lew Wallace's division at Shiloh. Mm-hmm. And Lew Wallace very famously got lost on the first day of the Battle of Shiloh. And I went through every single one of the reports from Wallace, from the members of Grant's staff. I was reading all of these. And basically, for those who don't know, Grant's army was spread out. There were 6 divisions, and they were spread out over about 10 miles. Wallace's division was way up to the north, and the 20th Ohio was actually the furthest north of Wallace's division because they were worried that the Confederates were going to come around and try to hit Grant's supply line from the rear. And so Wallace's division was way up there to protect the rear. And when the surprise attack happened on April 6th, Grant jumps on a boat at his headquarters and goes up the Tennessee River. And he has the boat pull up to the side long enough to tell Wallace, hey, get your division ready. We're going to need them. And then a little bit later, he sends a member of his staff to tell them to march to the right of the army. Well, there's some confusion. Wallace says he was waiting for written orders that never came. He finally starts marching, and he starts them on these winding roads. And when they get to where they think they're supposed to be, they find that Sherman has already, fallen back, and that if they march to where they were ordered to march to, they're going to be behind Confederate lines, and they're going to end up getting cut off. And so there's arguments over, did Wallace get lost? Did he intentionally hold his men back? But the bottom line is that Wallace ends up arriving too late in the day to be able to help. The battle's already over for the day. And there's an investigation that happens afterwards. Grant insists that Wallace was ordered to get there and that he failed to obey those orders. Wallace, to the day he died, swore he did his very best, and it was a bitter thing that went on. And so I tend to believe that Wallace probably could have been more aggressive than he was, but I don't think it was entirely his fault. JD, late to the party. You can go back and watch the beginning later on. But yeah, it's funny that was asked because that's been I dug a lot into, and I basically, rather than trying to interpret what I think happened, I basically just presented the reports of the men themselves, the generals and the staff members. Rawlins, James McPherson gave a report because he was on the staff at that point, and just let their reports speak for themselves, and the reader can decide what they think happened.
Excellent. It's a great history writing skill.
For sure. What is the most important battle that few people know about, in your opinion, Chris?
Champion Hill. I think it's the battle that decided the war.
Tell us.
Because I think Vicksburg was way more important than Gettysburg in a turning point of the war. And Champion Hill is what sealed the fate of Vicksburg. That was the battle, the decisive battle that bottled Pemberton up in Vicksburg and ultimately led to his surrender, which ultimately I think led to the collapse of the South. So yeah, Champion Hill, definitely. And I get to write about that too, because the 20th Ohio was there. So.
Oh, nice. Sweet. All right. Let's see here. What are your honest thoughts on Sherman?
He's a fascinating guy because very aggressive, super intelligent. I don't know if you've ever read his autobiography. It's very different than Grant. So Grant is a really easy read, right? It's like he's a regular guy telling stories, right? Sherman, Longstreet does this too in his autobiography. I felt at times like Sherman was beating me over the head with how intelligent he was. with just even the choice of words and things like that. And Sherman talked about that, about how he was way more intelligent than Grant was, but that Grant had something he didn't. And I'm predisposed to like Sherman because he's from Ohio. He, commanded the armies that the 20th Ohio was in. But he's a guy who I think learns on the job a lot. The first few hours at the Battle of Shiloh, Sherman made all the wrong decisions. He didn't think there was an attack coming. And when the attack did come, he didn't really think it was a big attack. And it was only when one of his staff officers got shot in the face right in front of him and his blood sprayed all over his face that he was like, oh my God, we're being attacked. And then he kind of woke up, and then he turned into Superman, and suddenly he made all the right moves. Sherman, I can see why Grant loved him so much. Grant loved an aggressive commander. Grant loved somebody who was willing to do whatever it took to win. And I think Sherman, more than maybe anybody on either side, understood what it took to win the Civil War. And that, of course, leads a lot of people to call him a war criminal in the South, but he understood what total war was, and he waged that war. So not perfect, definitely a flawed general, definitely had some weaknesses, but the kind of aggressive commander the Union needed to win the war.
Yep. Excellent. All right, next question. Ooh.
My third.
So the 40th Ohio, their paper, he saved her at Florida State. I'm guessing you can probably just go to Florida State. If you reach out to them and ask them and say, hey, can I have access to this? They'll get them out for you. The Rutherford B. Hayes Library has the Manning Force papers. Manning Force, first of all, amazing name, Manning Force.
Yeah, right.
He was the colonel of the 20th Ohio. Got the Medal of Honor at Atlanta when he took a bullet to the face. And Rutherford B. Hayes named a son, Manning Force Hayes, after him. But all their papers, they have all the Manning Force's papers. And it's just as simple as saying, hey, can I come to your library? Can I research? Can I look at these papers? And, they'll probably have some rules about how you do it.
Oh, yeah.
You might have to sit in a particular room, and, you might have to wear gloves. You might have to leave your backpack in a locker somewhere, but I'm sure you can get access to them if you request.
Oh, yeah. And for anyone out there who's hesitant to contact any archive or library, just know that that's why they're there. They're there to be protected and held,
right.
And they want people to come and view them. They're spending money to hold them.
Yeah.
So go and look at them. Just send an email to any library. They're very nice. They will not bite. Excellent. All right, next question. Your thoughts on Hugh Judson Kilpatrick, please.
Kill Calvary. Not a fan. I don't know. He just a lot like Custer, who's another Ohio guy. Custer's birthplace is 45 minutes from here. There's being aggressive, and then there's being stupid. And for me, Kilpatrick, more often than not, seems to lean more in the latter camp of being reckless rather than just being aggressive. I don't know what you guys think about that, but he's not somebody I've dug real deep into, but my encounters with him in history, I haven't had a favorable opinion.
Oh, got another genealogy question here.
Which of Kentucky and Missouri, which was most critical to the Union victory? It's hard. And I know my friend JD's in here too, who's from Missouri. And so he would definitely say Missouri. And my family being from Kentucky, I'm disposed to say Kentucky. But I think I would lean Kentucky more because of geography than anything. Missouri's Trans-Mississippi. It's not as centrally located to the heart of what's going on. Kentucky plays very prominently in the early part of the war, with Bragg, moving into Kentucky, breaking the neutrality. Grant's early actions are moving in Western Kentucky. Kentucky supplies a lot of troops to both Union and Confederates. More Union, it's probably like 70-30, something like that, Union versus Confederate. But both are very critical. And I think if you would have asked Lincoln, he wouldn't have wanted to spare either one of them under any circumstances. He saw how vital both of them were. Yeah, there's JD saying Missouri 100%. Missouri was just a very different kind of war, but I think Eastern Kentucky had a lot of the same elements, a lot of that bushwhacking, kind of raiding towns. And, we see the birth of the Hatfield and McCoy feud, for example, in Eastern Kentucky because of things that happened during the Civil War with guerrillas and things like that. So a lot of that was going on in both places.
Yes. Thank you, everyone, for all the questions. We're going to close our Q&A at this point. Now, Chris, we have one final question for you. You've been fielding these very well. What is one thing you love about what you do, and what is one thing that's not so fun about what you do?
The thing that I love that I didn't know I would love when I started it, and I alluded to it earlier in talking about the tours, is the community. I have so many really good friends, or just people that I've met here and there that have become familiar faces to me, or just people I interact with on YouTube and Discord and things like that. People that 5 years ago I didn't know and wouldn't have ever met had it not been for what I do with vlogging through history and with just history in general. So I love the community. I love that I've gotten to know people like you guys, that Gary and Chris, both Chris's, are among people that I consider friends and that I get to see every so often when we do events together, and Tim Smith of the West, and all these people like that. And so I love the community. I love how passionate so many people are about that, and this common love that we have. What's something I hate about it? It's frustrating at times, especially dealing with the Civil War, to see how many people just seem to have a willful ignorance about things that I thought were long understood and settled topics. Like the number of people who just flat out vehemently deny that slavery had absolutely anything to do with secession or the Civil War. And I just can't wrap my mind around something that is so obvious that even the people themselves, when they seceded, said, this is why we're doing it.
Right.
So that can be frustrating in dealing with the Civil War. So, and I understand that legacies are complicated. And as we said earlier, there's 1,000 reasons why a Confederate soldier served that might not have had anything to do with slavery for him personally, even though it did have everything to do with why secession happened and why his government was fighting. So there's that. And then just for me personally, as somebody who has ADHD and is not very disciplined at times, working for yourself can be a challenge. Because I'll start 20 projects and not finish any of them.
I feel that a lot. Yeah.
So Darren says I have to attend the symposium this year. When is it and where is it?
August 7th through 9th at Stevenson Ridge in
right after my birthday. It's where?
It's in Fredericksburg, actually. Stevenson Ridge. So your favorite place, your next town you're gonna live in. You got to come down and visit, scout out your house.
August 7th through 9th.
Yeah.
Well, I'm actually that's before I go back. That's in between my 2 trips to Scotland. So I might be able to do that. It's a perfect
palate cleanser.
There you go. Oh yeah, nice. I like that. I'll see what I can do about making that happen, Darren.
Excellent.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, we invite everyone, right, to come out to our symposium at Stevenson Ridge in August. And with that, thanks for everyone for spending some time on their Thursday evening and tuning in here with Madeline and with myself, and of course with Chris. And make sure you check out Chris's awesome channel, Vlogging Through History. I know I'm a fan. I know Madeline is a fan for sure. He's got some great content on there about the Civil War, but also about history and life in general, right? So
and specifically, if you want specific Civil War content, I have stories of the Civil War, doing a series on Stones River right now, and then Franklin after that. And then I also have the podcast Stories of the Civil War, where I do a lot of stuff too. So
excellent. Well, on behalf of Emerging Civil War, thank you once again for attending these, ECW In Conversation Live events, and we will see you online and on the battlefield.
Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks.